Welcome to Americana Archives. Today's headline is Money Kings of Old. The subheadlines say, Unhappy domestic lives of some of the Argonauts of 49. Lives of extravagance which at last ended in suicide or beggary. How the lawyer Lapham, the railroader, lost his head and was ruined. Brandon the Mormon, Ralston the Brilliant, and uxorious Sharon. It says, Brandon the Mormon was the pioneer rich man of the city. Brandon was a Mormon elder who brought out here a shipload of Latter-day Saints before the discovery of gold. When he started from New York, it was the intention of Brigham Young to found a Mormon empire on the shores of the Pacific. But Brigham halted by the way and built the new Zion at Salt Lake City, says the San Francisco Examiner. When the gold discovery came, he utilized his followers in mining, carefully collecting 1/10 of what they mined as church tithes. This tithing money started him on the way to fortune, and when Brigham demanded the tithes, Brandon laughed at him. The Mormon president cursed Brandon. Brandon laughed and went on making money. He was worth $5 million in 1855, when the first Vigilance Committee was formed. He gave freely to every public purpose. He scattered his fortune in 100 ventures, and finally the crash came. It was forced by Brandon's drinking and his neglect of business. Brandon went to Sonora, where he had been granted big concessions by the Mexican government, but his land was held by the Yaqui Indians, and he could never secure possession. He returned here just before his death. When I saw him, he was in a wretched room in a cheap lodging house, for which he paid 25 cents a night. He told me with grim humor that he had met that day in the streets no less than 3 men whom he started on the road to wealth, and each one passed by on the other side. Yet when he said this, he wasn't bitter, and when he left, his last words to me were, "You'll see that in a few months I'll be on my feet again. There's plenty of life in the old man yet." Lapham lost his head. The next millionaire to succeed Brandon was Milton S. Lapham, a lawyer, who developed a great taste for building railroads and developing industrial enterprises. He had the finest house in the city in the latter 50s, filled it with costly paintings, held superb receptions. He sank $6 million in a railroad, and this, with other disastrous ventures, swamped him. He collapsed and died, leaving no heirs. His fine mansion was converted into a boarding house. A contemporary of Lapham was F.L.A. Pioche, a shrewd Frenchman who once owned acres in South San Francisco. He handled his property well, built houses, drew enormous rents, and was soon many times a millionaire. He quarreled with his family and sent them back to France with ample means. Then he built a superb house on Stockton Street overlooking the beautiful bay. If its mirrored and frescoed walls could speak, they would tell of Sardanapalian banquets and of orgies in which women from Paris took a prominent part. But evil days fell on Pioche. Like so many others, he lost his head, drank too much brandy, and one morning was found dead in his beautiful rooms, with a pistol bullet through his head. He left his estate in such a fearful confusion that very little was saved from the wreck. His noble mansion was degraded to the service of a boarding house. The most brilliant of them all. But of all the men who had flashed like meteors for the California financial firmament, by all odds, the most brilliant as well as the most lamented was Ralston. He combined nerve, energy, and audacity. Ralston gained his nerve and much of his remarkable coolness in time of danger as a pilot on the Mississippi. As president of the Bank of California, Ralston had unlimited credit. He built the Laurel Palace at Belmont, 30 miles from the city, which is still the finest country house on the coast. There he dispensed hospitality that has never been equaled in this country. But the flood of silver and gold from the Comstock, which had put this eager life into the veins of San Francisco, began to run low. Ralston felt the change first, for he had planned everything on such royal lines that no retrenchment was possible. The great hotel, which was to cost $3 million, had absorbed that amount before it had risen more than 1 story above the foundation, and ultimately cost $6 million. He drew money from the bank to tide over his affairs, but times grew worse. The Bonanza millionaires controlled the situation, and they showed no mercy. Finally, exposure of Ralston's overdrafts came, and the Bank of California was on the verge of failure, and Ralston drowned himself in the bay. Sharon's trials with Sarah Althea. Sharon, Ralston's partner, had nearly as much tragedy in his life, although he died in his bed. He had phenomenal success as a miner and manipulator of mining stocks. He gathered fully $20 million, but Ralston's failure crippled him for a few years. In 1883, Sarah Althea Hill, a Missouri girl, brought suit against him for divorce and division of his estate, alleging that he had married her by contract. The publication of the arrest of Sharon on these charges produced a great sensation. It would have been money and reputation gained for Sharon if he had paid her $250,000 and thus sealed her lips. Although Sharon pretended to care nothing for these exposures, his intimate friends knew that he was morbidly sensitive. Every taunt, every caricature, every sneer told on him. The climax was reached when Judge Sullivan gave judgment in favor of the woman. Sharon lived long enough to know that the upper courts would ultimately reverse Judge Sullivan's decision. He died fully 10 years before his time, worn out by the passions aroused by the divorce suit. Sarah Althea is the latest victim. Her brilliant mind is wrecked, and she is now communing with spirits and fighting over again the battles for her millions that she is fated never to grasp. Old Mark Hopkins was the financial brains of the Big Four on this coast. He was a remarkable mathematician, and no one ever surpassed him in skill in drafting contracts and making estimates. Hopkins had no pleasure aside from the accumulation of wealth. Neither Hopkins nor his wife left any bequests to charity. Directly across from the Hopkins Castle is a large lot belonging to ex-Senator James G. Fair, the Bonanza millionaire. Fair is regarded by many as the ablest of the firm that included Flood, McKay, O'Brien, and himself. He is still in the prime of his life, but he is working now merely for the sake of retaining his wealth and the power it carries with it. 9 years ago, Mrs. Fair obtained a divorce from her husband. He made no defense and has secured freedom and $4,500,000. She was an Irish woman of no education who had helped Fair when poor. She bore him 5 children. Great wealth proved a curse to the children. The oldest boy is just dead, a victim of drink. The second son is now in Europe, but he is likely to follow in the footsteps of his brother. Neither was ever trusted by the father. He simply gave the lads an allowance. They had passed beyond his control long before their beards came. The girls have always behaved themselves, but of course, they are no help to the man who has millions. Millionaire Flood took more comfort in his family than Fair did, but he also had hard luck. His eldest son for years drank heavily and was frequently engaged in disgraceful scenes. It looked as though he would go the way of the Fair boys, but before his father's death, he seemed to receive some moral bracing up, and he has since attended to business fairly well. This story came from the great state of Minnesota, being reported in the St. Paul Daily Globe of June 7th, 1892. Thank you for joining us today. If you want to continue to uncover all of America's lost and forgotten history, then remember before you leave to hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and remember to like and comment below. And we will see you next time on Americana Archives.